Hello, and thank you for watching this training video for Arcade Street Mission. We're so glad that you've chosen to volunteer with our organization. Hopefully you've had an opportunity at this point to have reviewed some of our orientation materials, that you're aware of our vision, mission, and values to see a community in which all people are beheld, beloved, and belong. Today's video is intended to give you a couple of basic tools that will help you to interact with our community members, to have a sense of the type of work that we do here at Arcade. So even if you're not on the front line interacting with people, you have a little bit of context for the community that we work with, and a couple of key informational items that will help you to be successful in your volunteer role here at Arcade. You know, here at Arcade Street Mission, we have over 400 volunteers coming through this building on a monthly basis to ensure that we can provide important programs and services. In fact, on a weekly basis, the volunteer hours that we require to provide excellent service is about the same as having got lost there. In fact, we actually have so many volunteers helping us to provide our excellent services that the hours that are required to provide our services equals the same as 10 full-time employees. Without your help, we simply could not do the work that we're doing here at Arcade Street Mission, touching the lives of people from the streets of London and facilitating opportunities for love, healing, and liberation. Thank you so much for what you do. As part of our training and orientation for volunteers, we want to make sure that we cover a couple of key subject areas. First is that we want to cover trauma-informed service provision. This basically is covering the fact that we serve and work with people who have experienced trauma in their lives. We're going to go into more detail as I go through the slide presentation. As part of that, we're going to talk about some basic de-escalation skills so that when you come in contact with someone who may be reacting from a place of trauma, you have a couple of tools in the toolbox so that you can respond appropriately. We will talk about the concept of harm reduction. This is a philosophical approach to working with people who are living with addictions. And of course, we need to touch on health and safety. These are important topics that will help you to have a fulfilling and safe experience of volunteering here at Arcade Street Mission. So let's get started. What is trauma? Trauma is an experience that overwhelms an individual's emotional and psychological ability to cope and can result in lasting mental and physical effects. Events plus experiences plus effects equal trauma. So that means that when someone has an event in their life and their experiences that they've had throughout their life, there's an impact of those things. And those three elements together equals people's trauma. Many areas of development and functioning can be affected by trauma. People are affected by trauma differently. Not everyone who experiences it has a lasting impact. The mind and body are very connected in trauma experiences. Responses are both physiological and psychological. I wonder if you can think of a story or an experience you've had in your life that you actually, when you remember it, feel it in your body. Go ahead and take a moment to reflect. You know, was it the experience of riding quickly on a bike and falling and hurting your knee? So every time you get on a bike, you just kind of have that fear that you might fall. Small things like that, an injury, or larger things like every time I walked into my home, I didn't know would I be greeted with a warm welcome or some yelling. These are effects of trauma. These experiences live in our bodies and in our minds. And so just like our community members who come in for services, our volunteers and staff also have stories just like you. And it's important to remember that when we're working with one another and with our community members, that people may have had stories or experiences that have led to effects that equal trauma. A trauma-informed service is a broad approach to service delivery that applies the principles and practices to all clients regardless of trauma disclosure. Everyone in a community setting can practice in a trauma-informed way, even if trauma-specific treatment is not within their role. So certainly as a volunteer, we're not expecting you to be a trauma therapist or to be sensitive to all of the traumatic events in people's lives or know about them, but it's important that we actually employ the skills and the de-escalation techniques that are related to responding to people who have lived traumatic lives and have those histories. Some of those skills include understanding people. We want to understand the client in the context of their experience and help the client do the same thing. Something that we often think is, what has happened? Instead of what is wrong, right? We see people reacting in one way and we kind of go, what's wrong with that person, or what's going on? A more appropriate question might be to think, what has happened? And really explore that with somebody. Place the client's experience, coping, and recovery within their cultural, social, and developmental context. So consider the person's age, gender, socioeconomic status, and education. Another tool that we can use when working with people who have experienced trauma is to have a collaborative approach. And certainly as a volunteer here at Arcade, like I said, we don't expect you to be able to manage all of the things that may come up in conversation or experiences with our community members. Collaborate with the staff team, collaborate with the team lead, and collaborate with our coordinators and managers. Take a collaborative approach to working with the client and learn about their history and the ways it may be affecting their present life. Collaboration in setting treatment goals and working towards them, and be transparent regarding service provision, expectations, and decision making. This is one of the reasons that we in fact post what our community guidelines are, what our expectations are for people when they engage within our community space. A couple of things that we might want to do is consider when a person is in a triggered state, and be aware that feelings of safety must be reestablished before other work can be done. If someone is reacting from a very emotional or reactive place, it's not a good time for a full conversation. The first thing to do is establish that sense of safety, letting people know that things are okay, that you've got control of the situation, that everything, is going to be fine within the environment. And if you're feeling triggered, sometimes someone else's trauma can in fact trigger your own. So it's really important to de-escalate the situation. Allow for pauses in discussion and shift focus. Sometimes just distraction is one of the best ways to move from something that might be triggering or traumatizing, reminding someone of a traumatizing event in their life, and be able to move forward. So you might say something like, let's pause and take some deep breaths together. Just that change of activity can really bring people back into their bodies and help ground them. Don't make assumptions. Remember that someone may have experienced trauma without having disclosed it. So when someone is reacting or having behavior that's concerning to you, don't automatically go to, this is poor behavior. Consider that there may be a traumatic event or history or pattern of behavior that was established from a trauma in their past. This will help with maintaining a position of compassion towards that person and reminding you to use your trauma de-escalation tools. Take a non-judgmental stance that supports the client in moving from self-judgment to self-acceptance and compassion for self. So this is an opportunity to actually use your words and tone to help someone understand that you don't judge them for their past or for their stories, but that, self-acceptance and that we view these people as beheld and beloved and belonged. These are messages that can be very helpful in helping someone move through their trauma, memory, or experience. Use validation to communicate that the client's emotions and behaviors make sense given what they have been through. Validating someone's feelings is always helpful. When working in an environment where people are often triggered, it's interesting that we too can experience our own traumas within that context. The expectation we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. That's a quote from Naomi Raymond. Transference and countertransference is a common experience when you're working with people who have been traumatized. You also may experience some triggers that affect stories from your own past or history. Be gentle with yourself. Vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue are very real things. As with the client's response to trauma, the trauma exposure response is on a continuum. Clinicians, or in this case volunteers, may experience one or more of the following indicators to varying degrees. Hyposensitive to emotional material, numbed and discouraged about work with our community members. Hypersensitive to emotional material, over-identified and over-involved with clients. This is a time to be really mindful of your boundaries with people. Don't overshare. Increased sense of personal vulnerability. Feeling isolated and guilty over emotional experience of work with clients or with community members. Deliberate avoidance of our community members, or absenteeism at work, or in this case with your volunteer shift. If you're experiencing vicarious trauma or compassion fatigue from working here at Arcade Street Mission, we encourage you to reach out to the team lead who's on site, also to our volunteer coordinator. We want to provide you with support. In fact, if you've really been impacted by the work, we have an employee assistance program that covers our volunteers as well, and we'd be happy to connect you to that resource should you need it. It's important to practice self-care. And we hear this phrase all the time, and people kind of, sometimes roll their eyes or go like, what does this really mean? First of all, we need to realize that it's a privilege to be able to think about concepts of self-care, and certainly, when you're busy and you're just maybe being a student and going from class to class and having to do these volunteer hours and having to do this placement, it can be difficult to consider self-care. Or maybe you're a busy parent or a senior who's doing 47 volunteering roles. Taking care of yourself is still important, and we are advocating the ABC model of self-care. A, awareness of your limits, resources, and emotional needs. Be aware, take inventory. You never need to do more than what you have. We can't give what we don't have. B, balance among personal and professional activities. This means not everything can be about giving to others. We need to give to ourselves, feed ourselves, take care of ourselves. Certainly when you're here volunteering, never feel bad about taking a break or needing to get a drink or using the restroom. There's always more to do here at the Ark. That's something I've learned, over my time being here. But taking care of yourself, making sure your own needs are met is critically important so that you can care for others. And then connection to oneself, others, and something larger. And here at Arcade Street Mission, as a Christian faith-based organization, it's a constant reminder that we aren't responsible for everything that happens here at the Ark, that we know that there's a God that loves and cares for this community and for the work that we do here at the Ark, even more than we do. And so we have this larger sense of, serving our community with God's help and with God's love. But we also have this amazing community that we're part of. Every single person in our community, the community members who come for services, the staff members, the volunteers, the donors, there's so many people who make this work possible, that coming here and being part of the work at the Ark is part of connecting to others, and that's something bigger, a purpose. And of course, the connection to oneself. And we hope that through your volunteer experience, you actually learn something more about yourself, about gratitude, about just being self-aware and growing as a person through the work that we get to do here together at Arcade Street Mission. So that summarizes basically two areas of this training. One, the trauma-informed practice, just covering off what that is. And then two, some de-escalation techniques that we can employ in responding to that trauma that we might see in our workplace here. Now I'd like to talk to you about harm reduction. Harm reduction seeks to reduce the health and social harms associated with addiction and substance use without necessarily requiring people who use substances from abstaining or stopping. Included in the harm reduction approach to substance use is a series of programs, services, and practices. Essential to a harm reduction approach is that it provides people who use substances a choice of how they will minimize harms through non-judgmental and non-coercive strategies in order to enhance skills and knowledge to live safer and healthier lives. That's a pretty wordy description of harm reduction, but harm reduction really, in summary, is choosing life-giving methods of responding to people who are stuck in a system of addiction. It's really saying anything that we do to reduce the harm of those substances, that use, is a positive move. And here at Arcade Street Mission, we recognize that we serve a population of people of whom many are substance involved. They are using drugs and to varying degrees. And sometimes it's the use of drugs or not having access to their medications. Both can have real impact on people. So in the harm reduction approach, here at Arcade, we ensure that our staff are trained in naloxone. We make sure that we have sharps containers in our bathrooms so that people who may be using IV medications or drugs have a place to dispose of their needles safely. And we make sure that we talk to our staff and volunteers about where we can refer people to for safe supply items such as clean needles, help with understanding the impacts of their addiction and how to use more safely, and also where treatment can be found. And so to that, we actually refer people often to London Cares and London Intercommunity Health. We don't currently offer those things ourselves, but we do connect with other organizations for that. We want to make sure that our volunteers know that we understand that people use drugs within our community. We support life-giving options like safety, health, and recovery. We refer to organizations like London Cares or Intercommunity Health for things like clean needles and other supplies, as well as instruction. We ensure needle disposal protocols, and naloxone training is available for volunteers and staff, and naloxone trained staff are on site at all times. Harm reduction can be difficult to wrap our minds around. Why do we support people who are actively using this, death-dealing material, drugs? We know that people are dying from this. And it's really important to realize that when we take a harm reduction approach, we are supporting people and taking steps in their lives to reduce the chances of death. That we are in fact speaking life-giving words and providing life-giving solutions to people who are, really in bondage to a difficult substance use. And it is problematic that people are using these drugs that are oftentimes causing us grief and loss in our community. And at the same time, we must ensure that we are on the side of life and that we're speaking hope and possibility to people by maintaining this harm reduction stance. The last area of our training today is health and safety. And this could be a video all of its own, so we're going to touch on it at a fairly high level. First and foremost, it's really important to remember that if you are injured in any way while you're on site, please talk to the team lead that is present in the building. This person will fill out an incident report with you. Doesn't matter if it's a small scratch or something more serious. We do want to document if people are harmed, and we will follow up with you. Secondly, an eligible age for volunteering here. Often people wonder why we have an age limit on our volunteers, and that really has to do with health and safety. We want people to feel like they're able to assert themselves in situations and use the tools that we're providing through this training with people. We only allow people to volunteer if they're 16 and over. If between the ages of 16 and 18, we actually need a responsible adult volunteering with that person. And then at the age of 18, people can volunteer of their own accord. This training and other trainings that are available to you are there to ensure that regardless of age, people feel equipped to do the work. And it is important to take part in the training. This is sort of, general training for all volunteers, but there is specific training for each of the functions that volunteers may need to take on. So please be sure to engage in that one-on-one training, whether it's another volunteer training you or a staff member. Feel free to ask questions, and certainly you never need to do any task within this organization, whether it's being requested of you or whatnot, if you don't feel comfortable, equipped, and trained to do the job. Stay away from operating machinery wherever possible. If you're using something like the dishwasher, we should be training you on that and talking to you about how to use that machinery. And if that goes for any other machinery we may have in the building, if you want to use it, it is important to make sure you're trained on it. Stay away from chemicals. Now, WMIS training is provided for people who may be doing chemical-related activities, but it's really important to know how to read the labels on our chemicals and how to use them appropriately. So as much as possible, stay away from them if it's not something you've been trained on. Stay away from biological exposure. And here we are post-COVID, welcoming volunteers back into our space. Unfortunately, COVID isn't the only biological exposure we have to be concerned about. We are dealing with human beings and all kinds of fluids and things. So what we encourage is people to use universal precautions. What that means is we ask that you would use gloves when serving food, or make sure that you've got the proper PPE if you're coughing or just feeling slightly under the weather, but not fully sick. If you're sick, don't come. But if you're here and just not quite yourself, consider wearing a mask. Other, general PPE or what we call universal precautions is to make sure that you're not going into spaces or places where you see anything that is a biohazard. If you haven't been trained on cleaning that up or how to pick up sharps, we don't want you doing that. Please notify a staff member. We need to avoid slips and falls. This is actually the top injury that people sustain within any workplace, including ours. Wet floors and little stones, anything can create a tripping hazard. And of course, slipping and falling is just something that can happen. There's stairs throughout our building. There's lots of people and volume, and just it can happen. So be mindful of your step and do the tasks that are right for you. Each volunteer position has checklists and specific task lists assigned to it. If you don't feel, like I said, trained or equipped to do that role, you never have to do something that you don't feel comfortable doing. And certainly our team is here to support you. I hope that this training video, though a little bit lengthy, has been informative. And I hope that as you need to review these slides, you take the link and look at it whenever you need to. Please sign off that you have had this training. And certainly if you have any questions, be sure to email those questions to volunteer@arcademission.ca. Thank you so much, and thank you for being part of our team.